Thank you for that.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this event that is being put on by the Friends of Belsize Community Library. I think you probably all know who we are, that the Friends are there to support the library and try and make sure it keeps open and to raise money from time to time and help with various bits of expenditure. And the main effort that we've been making is putting on these events, which of course have been on Zoom now for some considerable length of time. Normally there would be a small donation that would be made at the door, and that's obviously somebody else coming in, something that we haven't done through Zoom, so it's all free. But if you look in the chat, I've put the link for the donations to Belsize Community Library, and so if anybody would like to make a small donation, that would be very welcome.
Sorry,
So,
can you put it on again, because you have to put it on for everyone who arrives.
Oh, wait a minute, it's disappeared. You're quite right.
Thank you.
Right. There we are. So in the chat now, you'll see that there's a donation link. You can click on the link, or you can copy it into your browser, or you can memorize it and think about making a small donation to the library. We'd be most grateful. Okay, so having said that, I'd just very briefly introduce Colin by way of saying that he needs no introduction. He's done several of his shows for the Friends of the Library before, and we'll see what he's got in store for us tonight. So over to you, Colin.
Thank you. Oh, yes, just a minute. Sharing screen. Share. Slideshow. Slideshow, please, from the beginning. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This year marks the 156th anniversary of the publication of one of the most famous books in the English-speaking world, and which has been translated into many languages. 177 on the last count. In this presentation, we see the book through the eyes of many illustrators, but the words are always and only those of the author, Charles Ludwig Dodgson, who in 1864 published this, A Guide to the Mathematical Student in Reading, Reviewing and Working Examples by Charles Ludwig Dodgson, M.A., Mathematical Lecturer at Christ Church, Oxford, 1864. Next year, the Reverend Charles Dodgson published another book using a pen name, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, with 42 illustrations by John Tenniel. Since then, Alice in Wonderland has had at least 100 different illustrators. Alice's form and fashion may change, but the story remains the same. Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank, when suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by her. The rabbit took a watch out of his waistcoat pocket, looked at it, and then hurried on. Alice ran after it and was just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole. In another moment, Alice went down after it, and suddenly she found herself falling down a very deep well. She fell very slowly, and as she looked at the sides of the wells, she noticed they were filled with cupboards and bookshelves. She took down a jar from one of the shelves as she passed. It was labeled orange marmalade, but to her great disappointment, it was empty. And then suddenly, thump, down she came upon a heap of sticks and dry leaves and the fall was over. Alice was not a bit hurt, and before her was a long passage. The white rabbit was still in sight, hurrying down it. She was close behind it when she found herself in a long, low hall, which was lit up by a row of lamps hanging from the roof. There were doors all round the hall, and suddenly she came upon a little three-legged table, all made of solid glass. There was nothing on it except a tiny golden key, and Alice thought it might belong to one of the doors of the hall, but alas, it wouldn't open any of them. However, the second time round, she found and came upon a low curtain, and behind it was a little door about 15 inches high. And Alice looked into the loveliest garden you ever saw, but she couldn't even get her head through the doorway, so she went back to the table, half hoping she might find another key on it. But this time she found a little bottle, and round the neck of the bottle was a paper label with the words "Drink Me" beautifully printed in large letters. Alice ventured to taste it and found it very nice, with a mixed flavour of cherry tart, custard, pineapple, roast turkey, coffee, and hot buttered toast, and she very soon finished it off. "What a curious feeling," said Alice. "I must be shutting up like a telescope." And so it was indeed. She was now only 10 inches high, just the right size for going through the little door into the garden. But alas, when she got to the door, she found she'd forgotten the little golden key. And when she went back to the table for it, she found she couldn't possibly reach it. She could see it quite plainly through the glass, and she tried her best to climb up one of the legs of the table, but it was too slippery. Soon her eye fell on a little glass box that was lying under the table. She opened it and found it a very small cake, on which were beautifully marked the words, "Eat me." She ate a little bit, set to work, and very soon finished the cake. "Curiouser and curiouser," cried Alice. "Now I'm opening up like the largest telescope that ever there was. Goodbye, feet." And in fact, she was now more than 9 feet high, and she at once took up the little golden key and hurried off to the garden door. Poor Alice, it was as much as she could do lying on one side to look through into the garden with one eye. She sat down and began to cry, shedding gallons of tears, until there was a large pool all round her, about 4 inches deep. And after a time, she heard a little pattering of feet in the distance. It was the white rabbit returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. Alice began, "If you please, sir." The rabbit started violently, dropped the white kid gloves and the fan, and scurried away as fast as he could go. Alice took up the fan and gloves, and as the hall was very hot, she kept fanning herself all the time, and she thought, "I must be growing small again." She was now about 2 feet high and was going on shrinking rapidly. She soon found that the cause of this was the fan she was holding, so she dropped it hastily, just in time to avoid shrinking away altogether. "That was a narrow escape," said Alice, very glad to find herself still in existence. And as she said these words, her foot slipped, and in another moment, splash, she was up to her chin in salt water. Her first idea was that she had somehow fallen into the sea. However, she soon made out she was in the pool of tears which she had wept when she was 9 feet high. "I wish I hadn't cried so much," said Alice, as she swam about. Just then, she heard something splashing about in the pool. At first, she thought it must be a walrus or a hippopotamus, but then she realized how small she was now, and she soon made out it was only a mouse that slipped in like herself. She began, "Oh, Mouse, do you know the way out of this pool?" The mouse looked at her rather inquisitively but it said nothing. Perhaps it doesn't understand English, thought Alice. I dare say it's a French mouse, come over with William the Conqueror. So she began with the first sentence in her French lesson book, which was, "Où est ma chat?" The mouse gave a sudden leap out of the water and seemed to quiver all over with fright. "Oh, I beg your pardon," said Alice hastily. "I quite forgot you don't like cats." "Not like cats," cried the mouse. "Would you like cats if you were me?" "Well, no, perhaps not," said Alice. Are you fond of dogs?" The mouse did not answer. "Oh dear," cried Alice. "I'm afraid I've offended it again." The mouse was swimming away from her as hard as it could go and making quite a commotion in the pool as it went. It was high time to go, for the pool was getting quite crowded with birds and animals that had fallen into it. There was a duck and a dodo, a lorry and an eaglet, and there were several other curious creatures. Alice led the way, and the whole party swam to the shore. They were indeed an odd-looking party that assembled on the bank, all dripping, wet, cross, and uncomfortable. At last the mouse called out, "Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I'll soon make you dry enough." They all sat down at once. Said the mouse, "Are you ready? This is the driest thing I know. Silence all round, if you please." William the Conqueror, whose course was favoured by the Pope, was most submitted to by the English, who had been lately much accustomed to usurpation and conquest. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, declared for him, and even Stigand, the patriotic Archbishop of Canterbury. "How are you getting on now, my dear?" Turning to Alice as it spoke. "Wet as ever," said Alice. "It doesn't seem to dry me at all." "In that case," said the dodo, "the best thing to do would be to get us dry, would be a caucus race." There was no 1, 2, 3 and no way, but they began running when they liked, and they left off when they liked. So it was not easy to know when the race was over. However, when they'd been running half an hour or so and were quite dry again, the dodo suddenly called out, "The race is over. Everybody has won, and all must have prizes." "But who is to give the prizes?" quite a chorus of voices asked. "Why, she, of course," said the dodo. And the whole party at once crowded round her, calling out in a confused way, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alice had no idea what to do, and in despair, she put her hand in her pocket and pulled out a box of sweets and handed them round as prizes. "She must have a prize herself, you know," said the mouse. "Of course," the dodo replied. "What else have you got in your pocket?" "Only a thimble," said Alice sadly. "Hand it over here," said the dodo, and he solemnly presented the thimble, saying, "We beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble." They sat down again, and Alice said to the mouse, "You promised to tell me your history, you know, and why it is you hate C and D." "Mine is a long tale and a sad tale," said the mouse. "It is a long tale, certainly," said Alice. "But why do you call it sad?" And she kept on puzzling about this while the mouse was speaking. "You are not attending," said the mouse, getting up and walking away. "What a pity it wouldn't stay," sighed Alice. In a little while, however, she heard again a little pattering of footsteps in the distance, and she looked up eagerly. It was the white rabbit, looking anxiously about it as it went, as if it had lost something. Alice guessed it was looking for the fan and the pair of white kid gloves, but they were nowhere to be seen. Everything seemed to have changed. The hall, the glass table, and the little door had vanished completely. Very soon the rabbit noticed Alice and called out to her in an angry tone, "My Lady Anne, what are you doing here? Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan." Alice was so frightened she ran off at once. He took me for his housemaid," she said to herself, as she came upon a neat little house with the name W. Rabbit engraved upon it. She went in without knocking and hurried upstairs. She found her way into a tidy little room with a table when her eye fell upon a little bottle. I'll just see what this bottle does, for really I'm quite tired of being such a tiny little thing. I do hope it makes me grow large again. It did so indeed, and much sooner than she had expected. Before she had drunk half the bottle, she found her head pressed against the ceiling and had to stoop to save her neck from being broken. She went on growing and growing, and she tried the effect of lying down with one elbow against the door. She still went on growing, and at last she put one arm out of the window and one up the chimney. Presently, the rabbit came to the door and tried to open it, but that proved a failure. Alice heard it say to itself, "Then I'll go round and get in at the window." "That you won't," thought Alice, and she suddenly spread out her hand and made a snatch in the air. She didn't get hold of anything, but she heard a little shriek and a fall and a crash of broken glass. At last came a rumbling of little cartwheels and a good many voices all talking together, and she made out the words, "Here, Bill, the master says you are to go down the chimney." She waited till she heard a little animal scratching and scrambling about in the chimney. Then she gave one sharp kick and waited to see what would happen next. The first thing she heard was a general chorus of, "There goes Bill." Then she heard the rabbit say, "A barrowful will do to begin with." "Barrowful of what?" thought Alice. But the next moment, a shower of little pebbles came rattling in the window. Alice noticed with some surprise that the pebbles were turning into little cakes. "If I eat one of these cakes," she thought, "I can't possibly become any larger. It must make me smaller." So she swallowed one of the cakes and began shrinking directly. As soon as she was small enough to get through the door, she ran out of the house and found quite a crowd of little animals and birds waiting outside. The poor little lizard Bill was in the middle, being held up by two guinea pigs who were giving it something out of a bottle. They all made a rush at Alice, but she ran off as hard as she could and soon found herself safe until a little sharp bark just over her head made her look up. An enormous puppy was looking at her with large round eyes. She picked up a little bit of stick and held it out, whereupon the puppy jumped into the air off all its feet at once. Alice dodged behind a great thistle to keep herself from being run over, and then made her escape. What a dear little puppy it was. If only I'd been the right size for it. I suppose I ought to eat or drink something or other, but the great question is, what? Alice looked all around her, but she didn't see anything that looked like the right thing to eat or drink. There was a large mushroom growing near her, about the same height as herself. And when she looked under it, and on both sides of it, and behind it, it occurred to her that she might as well see what was on top of it. And her eyes immediately met those of a large caterpillar who was sitting on the top, quietly smoking a long hookah. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar. Alice replied, "I hardly know, sir, just at present. At least I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have changed several times since then. I can't remember things that I used, and I don't keep the same size for 10 minutes together. Can't remember what things, said the caterpillar. Well, I tried to say, how doth the little busy bee, but it came out all different. Repeat, you are old, Father William, said the caterpillar. And Alice folded her hands and began, you are old, Father William, the young man said, and your hair has become very white. Yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right? In my youth, Father William replied to his son, I feared it might injure the brain, but now I am perfectly sure I have done. Why, I do it again and again. You are old, said the youth, as I mentioned before, and you've grown most uncommonly fat. Yet you turn a somersault in at the door. Why, what is the reason for that? You are old, said the youth. One would hardly suppose that your eye was as steady as ever. Yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever? I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough, said his father. Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs. That is not right, said the caterpillar. Well, it is not quite right, I'm afraid, said Alice. It is wrong from beginning to end, said the caterpillar. And there was silence for some minutes. What size do you want to be? He asked. Well, I should like to be a little larger, sir, if you wouldn't mind, said Alice. 3 inches is such a wretched height to be. It is a very good height indeed, said the caterpillar angrily. It was exactly 3 inches high. But I'm not used to it, pleaded poor Alice in a piteous tone. You'll get used to it in time, said the caterpillar. And then got down off the mushroom, merely remarked it as it went. One side will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow shorter. Alice remained looking thoughtfully at the mushroom for a minute, trying to make out which were the 2 sides of it. However, at last she broke a bit off the edge with one hand and nibbled a little of the right hand to try the effect. She was shrinking rapidly, so she set to work at once to eat some of the other bit. Then she found her shoulders were nowhere to be found. All she could see when she looked down was an immense length of neck, but she was delighted to find that her neck would bend about in any direction, like a serpent. She had just succeeded in curving it down amongst the trees when a sharp hiss made her draw back in a hurry. A large pigeon had flown into her face and was beating her violently with its wings. Serpent, cried the pigeon. I'm not a serpent, said Alice indignantly. Well, what are you? Said the pigeon. I can see you're trying to invent something. I'm a little girl, said Alice, rather doubtfully. A likely story indeed, said the pigeon. I've seen a good many little girls in my time, but never one with such a neck as that. You're looking for eggs. I know that well enough. I'm not looking for eggs, said Alice. Oh, be off then, said the pigeon. And after a while, Alice remembered she held the pieces of the mushroom in her hands, and she set to work very carefully, nibbling first at one and then at the other, until she succeeded in bringing herself down to her usual height. It was so long since she'd been anything near the right size, it felt quite strange at first. And then suddenly she came upon a little house about 4 feet high. Whoever lives there, thought Alice. It would never do to come upon them this size. I'd frighten them out of their wits. So she began nibbling at the right hand bit again, and did not venture to go near the house till she brought herself down to 9 inches high. Suddenly, a footman in livery came running out of the wood and rapped loudly on the door. It was opened by another footman in livery with a round face and large eyes like a frog. The fish began by producing a letter saying, "For the Duchess, an invitation from the Queen to play croquet." The frog footman repeated, "From the Queen, an invitation for the Duchess to play croquet." And then they both bowed low and their curls got entangled together. But when she looked up, the fish footman was gone, and the other was sitting on the ground near the door, staring stupidly up at the sky. Alice went up to the door and knocked. "There's no sort of use in knocking," said the footman. "And making such a noise inside, no one could possibly hear you." "What am I to do?" said Alice. "Anything you like," said the footman, and began whistling. So Alice opened the door and went in, and the door led into a large kitchen, which was full of smoke. The Duchess was sitting on a three-legged stool in the middle, nursing a baby. The cook was stirring a large cauldron, which seemed to be full of soup. "There's certainly too much pepper in that soup," Alice said to herself, as well as she could, for sneezing. There was certainly too much of it in the air. The only things in the kitchen that did not sneeze were the cook and a large cat, which was grinning from ear to ear. "Please, could you tell me," said Alice, "why your cat grins like that?" It's a Cheshire Cat," said the Duchess. "That's why." "I didn't know cats could grin." "You don't know much," said the Duchess, "and that's a fact." Suddenly, the cook took the cauldron of soup off the fire and at once set to work throwing everything within her reach at the Duchess and the baby. The Duchess took no notice of them when they hit her, and began nursing her child again, singing a sort of lullaby as she did so, and giving it a violent shake at the end of every line. "Speak roughly to your little boy, and beat him when he sneezes. He only does it to annoy, because he knows it teases. I speak severely to my boy. I beat him when he sneezes, for he can thoroughly enjoy the pepper when he pleases. Yeah, you may nurse it a bit, if you like," the Duchess said to Alice, flinging the baby at her as she spoke. Alice caught the baby with some difficulty and carried it out in the open air. She looked very anxiously into its face. There could be no doubt it had a very turned-up nose, really much more like a snout than a real nose. And also its eyes were getting extremely small for the baby. There could be no mistake about it. It was neither more nor less than a pig, and she felt it would be quite absurd for her to carry it any further. So she set the little creature down and felt quite relieved to see it trot away quietly into the wood. Suddenly, she was startled by seeing the Cheshire Cat sitting on a bough of a tree a few yards off. "Cheshire Bush," she began, "would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" "In that direction," the cat said, "lives a hatter, and from that direction lives a March hare. Visit either you like, they're both mad. We're all mad here. I'm mad, you're mad." "How do you know I'm mad?" said Alice. "You must be, or you wouldn't come here," said the cat, and vanished. While she was looking at the place where it had been, it suddenly appeared again. "Well, what became of the baby?" said the cat. "I'd nearly forgotten to ask." "It turned into a pig," said Alice. "I thought it would," said the cat, and vanished again. Alice walked on in the direction in which the March Hare was said to live. She looked up, and there was the cat again, sitting on a branch of a tree. "Did you say pig or fig?" said the cat. "I said pig," said Alice, "and I wish you wouldn't keep appearing and vanishing so suddenly. You make me quite giddy." "All right," said the cat, and this time it vanished quite slowly. She'd not gone much further before she came in sight of the house of the March Hare. She thought it must be the right house because the chimneys were shaped like ears and the roof was thatched with fur. There was a table set out under a tree in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea at it. The Dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion, resting their elbows on it and talking over its head.
Darling.
"No room, no room," they cried out when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," said Alice indignantly, and she sat down on a large armchair at the end of the table. "Have some wine," said the March Hare in an encouraging tone. "I don't see any wine," Alice remarked. "There isn't any," said March Hare. The party sat silent for a minute. The Hatter was the first to break the silence. "What day of the month is it?" he said. He'd taken his watch out of his pocket. "The 4th," said Alice. "2 days wrong," sighed the Hatter. "I told you butter wouldn't suit the works," he said, looking angrily at the March Hare. "It was the very best butter," the March Hare meekly replied. "Ever since that," the Hatter went on, "the time won't do a thing I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now. It's always tea time." The March Hare interrupted. "I'm getting tired of this. I vote the young lady tells us a story." I'm afraid I don't know one," said Alice. "Then the Dormouse shall," they both cried. "Wake up, Dormouse!" And they pinched it on both sides at once. "Tell us a story," said the March Hare. The Dormouse began in a great hurry. "Once upon a time, there were 3 little sisters, and their names were Elsie, Lacey, and Tiddy, and they lived in the bottom of a well." "What did they live on?" said Alice. "They lived on treacle," said the Dormouse. "It was a treacle well." And so these 3 little sisters, they were learning to draw, you know. "What did they draw?" said Alice. "Treacle," said the Dormouse. "But I don't understand." "You can draw water out of a water well," said the Hatter. "And so I think you should draw treacle out of a treacle well, eh, stupid?" This piece of rudeness was more than Alice could bear. She got away with great disgust and walked off. Next time she saw them, they were trying to put the Dormouse into the teapot. "I'll never go there again," said Alice, as she picked her way through the wood. "It's the stupidest tea party I ever was at in all my life." Then she noticed that one of the trees had a door leading right into it. "I may as well go in at once," and in she went. Once more, she found herself in the long hall and close to the little glass table. "I'll manage better this time," she said, and began by taking the little golden key and unlocking the door that led into the little passage. And then she found herself in a beautiful garden among bright flower beds and the cool fountains. A large rose tree stood near the entrance to the garden. Roses on it were white, but there were 3 gardeners at it, busily painting them red. She heard one of them say, Look out now, Five. Don't go splashing paint all over me like that. I couldn't help it, said Five. Seven jogged my elbow. That's right, Five. Always lay the blame on others. Would you tell me, said Alice a little timidly, why are you painting those roses? Five and Seven said nothing, but Two began in a low voice. Well, the fact is, miss, you see, there ought to have been a red rose tree, and we put in a white one by mistake. And if the Queen was to find out, we should all have our heads cut off, you know. At this moment, Five called out, the Queen, the Queen, and the three gardeners instantly threw themselves flat upon their faces. Alice stood where she was and waited. And the Queen said severely, who is this? My name is Alice, so please your Majesty. But she added to herself, why, they're only a pack of cards after all. I needn't be afraid of them. And who are these? Said the Queen, pointing to the three gardeners who were lying around the rose tree on their faces. How should I know? Said Alice, surprised at her own courage. It's no business of mine. The Queen turned crimson with fury and screamed, off with her head! The King laid his hand upon her arm and timidly said, consider, my dear, she's only a child. The Queen turned angrily to the gardeners by the rose tree. Off with their heads, she said, and moved on. You shan't be beheaded, said Alice, and she put them all into a large flower pot that stood nearby. Are their heads off? Shouted the Queen. Oh, it's gone, Your Majesty, the soldiers shouted in reply. That's right, shouted the Queen. Can you play croquet? Yes, shouted Alice. Come on then, roared the Queen. It's a very fine day, said a timid voice at her side. She was walking by the White Rabbit, who was peeping anxiously into her face. Very, said Alice. Where's the Duchess? Shh, said the Rabbit. She's under sentence of execution. Get to your places, shouted the Queen in a voice of thunder, and the game began. Alice thought she'd never seen such a curious croquet ground in all her life. The balls were large hedgehogs, the mallets live flamingos, and the soldiers had to double themselves up and stand on their hands and feet to make the arches. The chief difficulty Alice found was managing her flamingo. She succeeded in getting its body tucked away comfortably enough under her arm, but generally it would twist round and look up into her face. The Queen was in a furious passion and went stumping around, shouting, off with his head! Off with her head! But once a minute, Alice began to feel very uneasy. She was looking about for some way of escape when she noticed a curious appearance in the air. And after watching for a minute or two, she made it out to be the Cheshire Cat. Now I shall have somebody to talk to, she said. Who are you talking to? Said the King, going up to Alice and looking up at the cat's head with great curiosity. It's a friend of mine, the Cheshire Cat, said Alice. Allow me to introduce it. I don't like the look of it at all, said the King. However, it may kiss my hand if it likes. I'd rather not, the cat replied. Don't be impertinent, said the King. He called to the Queen, my dear, I wish you would have this cat removed. Off with its head, she said. Quite a large crowd had collected, and there was a dispute going on between the executioner, the King, and the Queen, who were all talking at once. The executioner's argument was that you couldn't cut off a head unless there was a body to cut it off from. and he'd never had to do such a thing before, and he wasn't going to do such a thing at his time of life. Alice said, "The cat belongs to the Duchess. You'd better ask her about it. She's in prison," the Queen said to the executioner. "Fetch her here." By the time, the cat's head began fading away the moment he was gone. By the time the executioner came back with the Duchess, the Cheshire Cat had entirely disappeared. "You can't think how glad I am to see you again, you dear old thing," said the Duchess, and they walked off together. As they went, Alice heard the King say in a loud voice to the company generally, "You are all pardoned." "That's a good thing," she said to herself. She felt quite unhappy at the number of executions the Queen had ordered. The King and Queen of Hearts were seated on their throne when they arrived, with a great crowd assembled about them. The knave was standing before them in chains, with a soldier on one side to guard him, and near the King was the White Rabbit, with a trumpet in one hand and a scroll of parchment in the other. In the middle of the court was a table with a large dish of tarts upon it. "I wish they'd get the trial done," she thought, "hand round their refreshments." But there seemed to be no chance of this. Alice was quite pleased to find she knew the name of everything there. "That's the judge," she said to herself, "because of his great wig." The judge, by the way, was the King. "And that's the jury box," thought Alice. "And those 12 creatures, I suppose they're the jurors." One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. And this, of course, Alice could not stand, and she went round the court and took it away, so the poor little juror wrote with one finger for the rest of the day. "Herald, read the accusation," said the King. This, the White Rabbit blew 3 blasts on the trumpet, and then unrolled the parchment scroll, which read as follows. "The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, she stole those hearts and took them right away." "Call the first witness," said the King. The first witness was the Hatter. He came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other. "I beg your pardon, Your Majesty, for bringing these in, but I hadn't quite finished my tea when I was sent for." "Give your evidence," said the King, "and don't be nervous, or I'll have you executed on the spot." This didn't seem to encourage the witness at all. He bit a large piece out of his teacup instead of the bread and butter. And just at this moment, Alice felt a curious sensation. She was beginning to grow larger again. "I wish you wouldn't squeeze so," said the Dormouse, who was sitting next to her. "I can hardly breathe." "Call the next witness," said the King. The next witness was the Duchess's cook. "Give your evidence," said the King. "Sure," said the cook. The White Rabbit said in a low voice, "Your Majesty must examine this witness." "Well, if I must, I must," the King said. "What are the tarts made of?" "Pepper, mostly," said the cook. "Treacle," said a sleepy voice behind her. "Collar that dormouse," the Queen shrieked out. "Behead that dormouse. Turn that dormouse out of court. Suppress him. Pitch him. Off with his whiskers." For some minutes, the court was in great confusion, getting the dormouse turned out. "Call the next witness," said the King. Alice watched the White Rabbit as he fumbled over the list, feeling very curious to see who the next witness should be. Imagine her surprise when the White Rabbit read out at the top of his shrill little voice the name Alice. "Here," cried Alice, quite forgetting in the flurry of the moment how large she'd become in the last few minutes, and she jumped up in a hurry and she tipped over the jury box. "I beg your pardon," she said. "What do you know about this business?" said the king. "Nothing," said Alice. "It's very important," the king said. But the White Rabbit interrupted. "Unimportant, your Majesty means, of course." "Unimportant, of course, Rabbit," the king said, and went on to himself. "Important, unimportant, important, unimportant," as if he were trying to see which word sounded best. Some of the jury wrote down important, and some wrote unimportant. And at this moment, the king cried, "Silence," and read out of the little book, Rule 42. All persons more than a mile high to leave the court. "I'm not a mile high," said Alice. "You are," said the king. "That's not a regular rule. You invented it just now." "It's the oldest rule in the book," said the king. "Then it ought to be number 1, said Alice. The king turned pale. "Consider your verdict," he said to the jury. "There's more evidence yet to come, please, your Majesty," said the king. "This paper has just been picked up." And the White Rabbit said, "He sent them word I had not gone. We know it to be true. If she should push the matter on, what would become of you? I gave her 1. She gave him 2. You gave us 3 or more. They all returned from him to you, though they were mine before. My notion was that you had been, before she had this fit, an obstacle that came between him and ourselves and it." The king muttered to himself, "We know it to be true. As a jury, of course. I gave her 1. I gave him, it must be the chance." "Wait, there they are," said the king triumphantly. "Nothing can be clearer than that. Then again, before she had this fit. You never had fits, my dear, I think." "Never," said the queen furiously, throwing an inkstand at the lizard as she spoke. "Let the jury consider their verdict," the king said for about the 20th time that day. "No, no," said the queen. "Sentence first, verdict afterwards." "Stuff and nonsense," said Alice loudly. "Hold your tongue," said the queen, turning purple. "I won't," said Alice. "Off with her head," the queen shouted. Nobody moved. "Who cares for you?" said Alice. "You're nothing but a pack of cards." And this, the whole pack rose up in the air and came flying down upon her. And she gave a little scream, trying to beat them off. Then she found herself lying on the bank, brushing away some leaves that had fluttered down from the trees. So Alice got up and ran off for her tea, thinking while she ran as she might, what a wonderful dream it had been. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
It's really lovely.
Thank you so much for that, Colin. Beautiful pictures and very nice to hear all of Alice all over again. Remarkable. So anyway, that we're not going to have any discussion tonight. That was a great event, and look forward to hearing more from Colin at some point in the future. And just to let everybody know that our next event will be on the Thursday, the 17th of February, when we've got Tudor Allen, who's Senior Archivist at the Camden Local Studies and Archives Centre, who'll be talking to us about Elizabethan Camden. So you're very welcome to come along, 7:30 on the 17th of February. So thank you very much for coming, and good night, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. That was great.
Well done, Colin.